Welcome to the Micro Contrast Photoshop plugin. This is a very small, lightweight plugin which offers 3 individual micro contrast levels. We've got a low level, a medium level and a high level. The Micro Contrast plugin basically enhances the local contrast found within an image. Now the trick with local contrast enhancement is that it has to increase the local contrast which appear in the smaller regions of the photograph, while at the same time it has to try and prevent an increase in the global contrast. If we was to simply apply a levels or a curves adjustment and increase the contrast, that then becomes what we call the global contrast because it affects the entire image. Yes, we can then apply a mask to that and mask away or mask in that effect, and in some cases that can be quite desirable. But when we're looking to try and increase the overall image in the local or micro regions, this is where micro contrast or local contrast can really come into its own. And this is exactly what this small Photoshop plugin actually does. It's very simple to use. We've only got the 4 controls. We can apply a local, a medium or a high level of micro contrast, and then we can increase or decrease the overall strength. Now, just like all the recent plugins that I'm developing for Photoshop, it carries the same theme in the sense that under the flyout menu, we've got the traditional tools that we see in other types of plugins. So you'll start to see a familiar theme appearing with these new UXP plugins that I'm developing. So let's look at the micro contrast. Now, depending on the image resolution, and that's going to determine at what level you want to apply this micro contrast to. If you're just working on a very small image, say for JPEG distribution, that might be something like a 1800 to 2000 pixel wide image, you might find that applying the low level of contrast is sufficient. But if you're dealing with a larger image, maybe a scan of a black and white film, or in the case of this photograph that we're looking at, which was taken with a Leica monochrome camera, and you might find that you want to apply the high level of contrast in the micro regions, simply because we're dealing with a much larger image. So, as I've always said to you before, resize the image first for your desired output, whether that's going to be for the web or whether it's going to be for print, and then work on that image to start to apply your different levels of, in this case, micro contrast adjustment. It's no good applying a particular part of contrast to an image of this size and then reducing that down to 800 pixels to distribute across the internet. That's not really how it's going to work. Always start with your main file, make a copy of that, and then work on that file for your desired output. So having said that, let's look at how easy it is to apply some level of contrast to this particular image. Well, I'm going to start by viewing this at an equivalent of 100%. So that's 100%, but because I'm running on a 5K monitor, I need to actually go to 200%, which equates to 100% on a standard HD monitor. So I'm just going to look in the areas of this cactus, and this was kindly donated to me by one of my viewers, Martin. So thank you for that, Martin. And I'm just going to look at this particular area. So I'm going to start by applying the low level of micro contrast first, and we simply do that by choosing the low level button. Before I do that, I just want to point out one thing about the plugin. If we're starting with one single layer, you'll notice that the plugin is deactivated, and that's simply because we need to create a stamp visible and then work on that particular layer, and we can't stamp visible if we've only got the one layer active. So I'm just going to create a duplication of that background layer. Now we can use the plugin. So I'm going to start by pressing the low level, and what you'll see it does, it actually creates a stamp visible, which is here, and then it applies that to a group, and it actually reduces the opacity to 88% for the case of the low level. So that's before and that's after. I can see an effect on here. It's probably not strong enough for the size of this image if I was going to print this at its native size. We can increase or decrease the perceptive strength by increasing or decreasing the slider value. So if I turn it up to 100%, again, it is having an effect, but probably not quite as much as I want. So I'm just going to disable that layer, come back to the background copy, and now I'm going to choose the medium one. And just like before, it does exactly the same, only this time it creates a medium group. The opacity is set slightly higher. Let's go for a before and after. I'm starting to see the effect come in now, especially around the edges of here. And I can increase or decrease the overall effect. So let me disable that one, come back to the background layer, and this time I'll apply the high level. And the high level's opacity has dropped to 82%, so let me just bring that up to 100 and go before. So I can really start to see that micro contrast being applied now when I look around the edges. And you'll also notice that even at 100%, it's not introducing any artifacts. We're not seeing any halos appear where the dark pixels meet a lighter pixel. So if we look at the edge of this cactus, this very sharp part of the cactus here, we're not actually seeing any halos appearing, and that's normally where you would see the halo artifacts appear if you apply too much contrast, because we're actually targeting the dark pixels against light pixels, and that's where we see the halo appear. So even at 100% on the high value, we're definitely seeing an increase in local contrast, but we're not seeing those halos appearing. So that's the micro contrast plugin. The only other thing I will mention about this is that when you're applying micro contrast, it's going to slightly increase the values of the highlights. If I come down this image, although these are in the background, and because of the shallow depth of field, we're not actually seeing them in the full clarity, but we can actually see that we've not got any blown out highlights. We've got a nice rendition of tones in this image. Now, when we're using the micro contrast, as I say, it's better to apply the micro contrast first before you start to increase the brights or the highlights to give you that level of highlight that you want. Because if you set your white point first and then apply the micro contrast on top of that, what you might find is that you might just end up clipping some of those whites, because the micro contrast will actually stretch the white pixels higher and the low pixels lower, because that's what adding contrast does. So you might just find yourself pushing yourself into that area where you may have some areas of whites which are going into pure white simply because you've added the micro contrast. So add the micro contrast first, get that level correct, and then you can start to then manipulate where you want the whites and the blacks to appear after you've applied that local contrast. If you want to apply the local contrast locally through the effect of a mask, once you've actually established the level that you want, there's nothing to stop you coming back to the group and then applying a black mask or a white mask, whichever way you want to do it, and then we can simply paint back in the effect using the mask. So you can do it that way if you only want to apply the micro contrast to a particular part of the image. So that's the micro contrast plugin. It's compatible with Photoshop version 24 and newer for both Mac and Windows, and that is now available on the website, and as usual I will leave a link for that in the description below. So until next time, thank you for watching, bye for now.